This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you Friday morning. It's November 17th, and on today's show, we have Kyle Teige joining us to we're calling this a recapping the week that was, I guess, in Wolves world. We'll get Kyle's thoughts on the winning streak, getting up to 7 in Golden State and ending in Phoenix on Wednesday night. And then for the second half of the episode, we're going to be joined by Dan Bowling. We've had Dan on a few times in the last year or so to talk about the Mark Lowry and Alex Rodriguez sort of succession plan. And I'm kind of looking at it. It's the end of November, and the payment sort of kind of thing is like a month away. So I figured this would be a good time, as we had a couple days off, to talk to Dan, so we at least have the ownership thing on our mind as I think we'll probably start getting a little bit more news on that in the next month or so. And then one other just announcement thing. Next week, Thanksgiving week, there will be no shows on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. So just me and Chris on Monday. And then Britt's going to jump up to doing Tuesday with me as well. That's my spending family time. I leave town for Thanksgiving, so I'm not going to do shows while I'm there. So that's the plan. Just I know that's a Thanksgiving travel time. It's actually a good time to have pods, but we got a bunch from this week. We'll have one on Monday and Tuesday. And then, I'll be back the following Monday, November 27th, after the Wolves play the Grizzlies in Memphis. That Sunday night, I'll actually be at that game. All right, Kyle, let's recap this week that was. Where do you want to start?
Well, I just want to say first, let's get the housekeeping out of the way. I want to congratulate you. I know I tweeted this the other day, but top 20 podcast. That stuff means a lot. I've said it before over at Flagrant House too, like the support, the people that tune in, that support our sponsors, support us. I also know, selfishly, as someone who in the past has traveled around Thanksgiving, it's nice, like you said, to have a bunch of pods loaded up, but also a good reminder, especially today, we're using this podcast as just kind of like a let's catch our breath moment, and just kind of like, where are we? That's what, if I could give any advice, that's what people should also do next week with Thanksgiving and just in life. It's been a tough fucking year for a lot of people, and just as much, and we appreciate when people tweet at you on Thursday morning, right? Like, hey man, happy Thanksgiving, where's the podcast? But take a couple of days, hang out with your family, hang out with your friends. Life is short. Reach out to people. We all have a lot to be thankful for. So I think it's a good moment next week to just everyone kind of regroup and give attention and love to those people that deserve it. But I just want to get off my chest. Today, do you want to start with Wendell Moore or Josh Minot? Because I have some thoughts.
Well, I think, can I just say something here?
Sorry, I don't like to be emotional on these, but just it's a good.
You got a lot of stuff going on right now, and you and I have both talked about this in the past, like privately, and I believe this, that like sports are a great distraction, and not in a completely check you out of other things that are going on in your life, but for a little while they can be 2-3 hours watching a Wolves game with Grady and Jim Pete. There's a lot of people, and I feel that in my life too, where that is a nice thing about sports. It's a nice thing about the Timberwolves is it is always there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all have a lot of things going on, and the holidays in particular can be a difficult time for that. So our hope is that this is always a podcast that is an escape and an effective distraction for a little bit. We'll give you an hour of Kyle analogies and weird statistical deep dives or something like that. But it just for other people out there who, maybe are anxious about the holidays and Thanksgiving and all those sort of things coming up. We feel you, we hear you, and we don't know what to give you other than a podcast, but we're going to give you that.
And again, we've said this before, especially in September. If you're going through stuff, I can't stress this enough. I don't care about basketball, or like if you're going through stuff, just know that you're not alone. there's people out there that care about you, that, reach out. Don't be alone. The holidays, too, are a time to celebrate and, like I said, be thankful and all that stuff. And with Christmas and various other holidays coming up, but it can also be a really lonely time. So if you're spending the holidays by yourself, re-listen to some of the podcasts. I heard yesterday Britt basically said I know ball. So if you just want to go listen to that a bunch of times, Britt Robson complimenting me, that was a day maker. But yeah, it was cool this week. It's been a whirlwind 2 weeks, whirlwind 10 days since we last spoke. A lot of wins. Nice little break here, but thanks again to everyone that supports what you and I do over here and what everyone else on our team does at the Dane Moore podcast and Flagrant Howls and stuff. So let's talk hoops for a little bit. Let's distract the masses, and then let's all regroup and show some love to the people that deserve it.
How about we do it like this? Let's go in reverse. Let's start with the back-to-back, like the Phoenix and second Golden State game. I mean, you and I haven't talked much over the course of this last week. I mean, like you said, you listened to Britt and I talk about the Phoenix game last night. I mean, it just kind of is what it is. Like it was the quote unquote scheduled loss, where you kind of go into that knowing it's going to be long odds to win. I think I kind of came in with the expectation that it would likely be a loss. You're open-minded to the idea that, is this team just dialed, and able to beat Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And they were not. I think, again, as you heard Britt and I talk about, and just putting my finger to the wind, it seems like a lot of people give a pass is maybe like too kind of because I think there's things to pick at from that game, but it was an understandable loss given what the previous 72 hours in San Francisco was against the Warriors. So just on that dynamic first, which maybe ties into the fight game, game 2 in Golden State, your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, this, right? Because you're pretty plugged in online as well. It really seemed like that Suns game was the first time like Wolves Twitter collectively was just like, yeah, that's okay. Like we'll take that out. And I think as a member of it, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but that's probably the biggest takeaway. It has nothing to do with the game. It's that the fan base collectively was like, we're actually pretty cool with just taking an L there. And it's deserved, right? Like not deserved, but they just ran out of gas. I mean, you almost throw it back to you here. You were on the road for those 2 Warriors games. We were texting and calling throughout the week, and like when I talked to you yesterday, sound gassed, and you didn't do anything.
No, but we always joke about that, right? Like honestly, I'm dead serious when I say this. Traveling, and I don't even do it all the time. I go to 10, 15 games a year or whatever on the road. It has very much like shifted my perception of how much it does matter to be on a road trip, or what I understood the concept of home court advantage, right? When my whole life, but like since doing this and doing some travel myself, like I now I feel like I have a better understanding, or maybe like compassion for just the sluggishness that comes in from, and I know they're traveling very differently than I am, but like it isn't even just the traveling. It was Golden State, right? You're playing the Warriors. It's the fight, and it's not even that, but it's the national media. It's like Chase Center is like Staples Center back in the day, right? It's everybody is like a little bit fancier. There's like all the guys, everyone is just like dressed up, and it's a performance. And I think it's busy. I think it's busy outside of, the time that you're on the floor there as well. Tons more media in the locker room. I mean, Rudy did like 15 one-on-ones over the 2 days. Like you're going to see those stories come popping out. So it's I guess I'm leaving, coming home for the game against Phoenix, and I'm like, I wonder where this team's head is going to be at going into Phoenix. And I understand and believe it probably will be a little foggy. And it proved to be that. I don't personally give a full pass, if for nothing else, then that's kind of been a pattern of behavior for this team, is being a bad back-to-back team, or just looking comparatively more lethargic than other teams who are on back-to-backs. I think Ant still I mean, he historically has struggled with that a little bit. He's talked about that on the record about not being a good back-to-back player. Hopefully that's something he continues to grow in. But he was pretty like sluggish himself. So maybe that's the thing is it's like, what can this team be when Anthony Edwards is sluggish? Because that's going to happen, I don't know, 5-10 times this season, whether it be back-to-backs or it be other games. He's the energy jolt of the team. And when he doesn't have it, I guess I'm just putting in my head, like, if I'm Finch, what am I doing to inspire activity, pace, pursuit, those sort of things? Because the Suns game had so little of that, even if that was understandable.
Yeah, my quick little anecdote on the Suns game and the Warriors brawl was I didn't catch the game live. I was trying to be a good husband, and that quickly dovetailed into being a bad husband as my phone is just getting texts of like Draymond and fight. So I ended up watching the game late that night, and then they win. So to actually talk a little hoops here, like
right.
I thought it was one of the more, and you've went deep on this already, so I don't want to add too much, but Jace was great about this, and obviously Britt too. It was a really impressive win, and we were talking a little offline. You had a cool anecdote about like talking to some of the players in the locker room after the second Golden State game, and them also acknowledging like, hey, we lose that game by 20 last year.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like that's if the players are kind of saying the same stuff that us crazy random talking heads are saying, it's clearly a vibe and a message in the locker room. But I was so impressed by that win. But then, dude, this won't surprise anyone, including you. I was amped up Tuesday night watching the game live, you know, getting all my tweets off about Kerr and Draymond and just that NBA Twitter was back on Tuesday night. There was so much going on in the league. I mean, there was a Memphis Grizzlies Lakers little brawl and stuff. But I was texting someone with the team and like, it was 1:45 a.m. for me out on the West Coast, and obviously Arizona now has moved into a hour ahead, but like they're still up. Like they're not getting back till 3 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning. Yeah. You check in, like your emotions are high, right? Like you said, Rudy's doing 100 different interviews and calling Gobert out in 14 different languages. So you just kind of knew it. I mean, I went to that Suns game to watch it on my couch, and I was like, I don't have it tonight. I'm not going to tweet just so I get why they were out. Yeah. And it was the first real time that I think as a collective fan base, media, whatever, we agreed that it was a schedule loss. With all that said, and putting that down, I don't know, man. I would have loved to see Josh Minot play. I would have loved to, like, and back to your point about there were little things. Like, I don't know, as much as Nikola Jokic is the best player in the league in my mind, and we've seen them throw a Rudy at him and a Karl, Nas size, no one can stop Nikola Jokic. But the Wolves have a pretty good strategy to slow him down. I think Devin Booker might be the single hardest guy for this team to defend right now. And that again, in a game where one team was trying really hard and one team was just on fumes, it still came across the screen of like, how do they slow him down? Like Jaden can guard a lot of guys, but there's something about Booker's game that just makes it a little more difficult. Other things that I just wrote down in that game, it's like, I know that's from a culture standpoint, Finch is never just going to sit a bunch of guys. And he was still playing them late into the fourth, even though they were down 20. And that's partly because, right, the Suns are the new Wolves of the fourth quarter. Like, they're the worst team in the league. I think they have fewest points per game in the fourth. They don't execute very well. But, like, I don't know. I would have loved to have seen some of these younger guys get, like, a rep in a game like that where it's like, we're probably not going to win, but we could give you, like, a real meaningful rep. This team doesn't have a backup point guard. It would have been great to maybe call Wendell Moore up for a game and just, like, throw him in the mix a little bit, see if he can slow down Devin Booker. I don't know. I'm really criticizing the most minor things after a 7-game winning streak, the longest one since 2004. But long story short, I texted you this week, like, I kind of want to see them lose. Just so we can kind of, like, reset the vibes and also start to, like, nitpick on things that this team still, as you've said, has a lot of meat on the bone. And for them to kind of elevate themselves and continue this progress, they need to start to kind of consume more of that meat, right? Like they're playing with fire in some of these games where I'm so proud of them because they grind out these fourth quarter victories. But you go back and watch some of the like recaps of those games, like they could have just beat those teams by 10 or 15 and not had to sweat it out. So we're reset. They're 8-3. They had a couple days off, one more game in New Orleans, and they come home. But the rest of the month is still really hard. They play a bunch of good teams, and they're going to now need to refocus that energy that they had to start this winning streak because the schedule doesn't ease up until like Christmas.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to like that Finch opted to not give anybody like a rest day in Phoenix. And that's kind of been his pattern. I'm not saying that's like right or wrong or whatever. Different coaches have different tactics on it. That's what Finch's is. But they went into Phoenix and they were like, pretty much same rotation, same everything as the Golden State games were or have been sort of all season. And I do think that's like an interesting philosophical question, right? Of like, what do you do as a coach when your main like 8 guys probably aren't going to have it, right? Do you trust them to push through? Like you get that vibe at shoot around, do you trust them to push through? Or do you accommodate accordingly? Like Mike Conley's the one I always think of, who's like played pretty much in every single game this season, or since he's been here, even last season after the deadline. And he's also 36. He's also critical to, it's kind of like the only point guard on the team right now. Like, what is that balance of when do we give him a day off or anyone else on the team? It just feels like, particularly, and knock on wood that everyone's like healthy. And I don't love like load management or anything like that, but you got to sort of think about it too. I think particularly when you have the older players on the roster. The Mike one just came to mind, who actually, he kind of seemed the most like locked in to the Phoenix matchup anyways, like him and Kat. So I don't know, but I think that is a fair takeaway and something to think about here as they have other back-to-backs or as the season goes on. How does Finch sort of handle that?
Clearly talking out of both sides of my mouth, by the way. Very self-aware that like I'm also the person that was complaining about all the stars that are resting when they come to Minnesota, and I too don't love load management, and it's like, this is your job, you get paid millions of dollars, play. But I just it almost seemed, and this is so weird, right? Like I want to restate that I had 10 of the greatest, 11 of the greatest days of my life just watching this team string together wins. But the Suns game seemed kind of half-assed, right? Like they had one foot in the, like, oh, we're going to try to compete, keep the culture, no days off type thing. But in the other, you just watched that game, and in the first quarter, you knew they didn't have a chance.
Right.
And it would have been fun. And maybe this is down the road, right? We are only 11 games into the season, so I don't know if anyone should be that tired. But as you get into game 42, game 61, it would be fun to just kind of throw the Iowa Wolves out there in a game. I mean, that's like what the Warriors did after Draymond and Clay got ejected, was just, let's just throw all the young guys in there and see what sticks. I would love to have one of those games. And that is, again, champagne problems of being like, this team that we follow and cover now is actually good enough that they can just punt on a game or two. But it just brings back these ideas of that have nothing to do with the current roster, but it just kind of leak into my head of like, we're 2 draft classes into the Tim Connolly era, and Tim Connolly now, the Rudy Gobert trade looks completely different. The Kyle Anderson signing is the greatest signing in franchise history for a free agent. He's extended Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels and Ant, but outside of Wendell Moore preventing John Morant from shooting a basketball for a couple minutes, like this, the draft classes have made no significant like moving the needle. And at some point, that's going to have to happen, right? Like, I know we don't want to talk about 2024 too much yet, but it would be nice to just inject some of these guys. I mean, Josh Minot's not in Iowa for a reason, but he couldn't get in until the last 4 minutes of a game that you're down by 20 the whole time. So little things like that, not having a backup point guard. McLaughlin's went out now. He's out for another, 3 weeks. They're not going to give Wendell a chance. They're trying to still kind of explore the Shake Milton idea. So little things like that aren't a big deal in November, Dane, but I think we're going to need to know answers to that come February and March.
Yeah, they're the cool problems to try and find
cool
answers
problems.
to.
I like that. Yeah,
yeah. We have a new sponsor today. I'm excited to share that your home improvement company is going to be working with us. Now, look, I try to find sponsors that I think you, the listener, can actually use. And while I know not all of you are thinking about a home improvement project, I know many of you are. And if you are, keep that business in our little Wolves family here by using your home improvement company. And if you are in particular looking to replace your windows, act now. Your home improvement company is offering half off your entire window project through the end of November. or not windows, maybe you have a bathroom install. Don't wait around on companies that say, it's 3-4 months down the line where they can get to you. Your home improvement company will take your order, take you from order to installation in 30 days, a complete bathroom project. Again, from order to installation in 30 days, done by trained and certified professionals. So it's done right the first time. No interest, no payments, nothing down until 2025 on that bathroom install. Again, keep it in the Wolves family by using your home improvement company. For more information, go to yhic.com or schedule a free consultation by calling 406-278-6177. That's yhic.com or call 406-278-6177. Your home improvement company, your home made better. All right, Kyle. Let's keep moving along here, looking at the week that was. Again, I kind of did this with Britt, but as I'm cycling back through the week that was and comparing it to the week that was prior, I think the biggest difference, bar none, this is so clear, is the play of Karl Anthony Towns and what a more stable, consistent, and productive version of Cat looks like. I mean, this is allowing us to kind of, I don't know if all the pieces have come together and played well together in one single game yet this season, which is, again, a pretty good thing if you're 8-3. But now we've seen what Karl can look like great, what Cat can look like great, what Rudy can, the rest of the starting lineup, most of the whole entire rotation. We've seen great spurts from them. And it's, I don't know, I'm starting to be able to put the puzzle together and picture what this can all look like. Karl is obviously a huge part of this picture, both immediately and sort of existentially, right, with the group. What have you taken away from Karl's play over this last week?
Oh, I messaged you about this a couple of days ago, but I was just Karl's play in general, the Rudy trade, how all of this fits all of a sudden, right? Like I've had some time off now to like consume national podcasts, right? Like Zach Lowe and Simmons on stuff. And my biggest takeaway is it just reminds me of I remember being a junior in high school and just I couldn't wait for college. Like I was just like, I just can't wait to get to college, like whatever. It'll be a relief. It'll be a new chapter of my life, all this stuff, and it'll be easier. And then you get to senior year and you're like, this is awesome. Like I'm like the big man on campus. Like I might not see some of my friends ever again as they go different places again. This is a different time in life without as much social media. So all of a sudden when I was like, you look forward to something and then you get a little closer and like, actually, I don't want to lose this feeling. We have talked about this podcast specifically. We have talked about for the last 6-8 months, the summer of 2024 of being like this relief. Like we talk about it in the big scary terms of second apron and all these things. And they're going to have to pivot off of one of their big guys and stuff. And like, I think the message has always been like, next summer they'll figure it out and they'll get rid of the big guys and life will be easier and this will make more sense. Well, it kind of makes a lot of sense now, right? Like they're the best defense in the league and they're doing it with a too big system that the experiment is 11 games, but the experiment is starting to work. And I just find myself all of a sudden being like, instead of optimistically looking at next summer, like more dreadfully looking at next summer, because I think in the last 10 games, Kirk Goldsberry does that awesome like efficiency chart. The Wolves are second in defense and 11th in offense and fourth in net rating. This is working. Mm-hmm. Like the Karl Anthony Towns calf injury, you never want anyone to get injured, but that whole situation last year might have been like a blessing in disguise to just see how Rudy becomes more acclimated and the players trust him and get Nas in. And now they're all healthy and they're all playing at a really high level. Karl at the top of that list. And it's really, I mean, I went to both those Warriors games and I had no fear. Like, that's crazy. It's the Warriors, right? And you're just like, they can't keep up with the size and the length of this team. And a lot of it's been on Karl. I mean, in a game that was probably the most emotional game of the season, right? The Warriors' second game, the coolest person on the court was Karl. Yeah. He has clearly, if not listening to the podcast, answered the questions that we talked about 2 weeks ago about being an energy vampire. He's just playing basketball now. And when he plays basketball and at this level, you've been saying this for a week now, like it takes that ceiling and just either blows it up or it lifts it 10 stories higher. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I just all of a sudden I'm like, I really don't want to graduate. I just want to be like, I want to be a senior with the Wolves for as long as possible because this is fun. And the basketball itself is like, I mean, that three he hit on the Kyle Anderson rebound, kick to Mike, swing it to Carl, that's cold-blooded. Like, what else do you want to say? Like, that's a cold-blooded three down 98-96 to give yourself the lead, rely on Rudy's defense on the other end, and then Ant makes a play that we don't really see him make to close that game out. It's just been really impressive, and I think Carl has just put his head down and played basketball, and if that's the Carl you're going to get moving forward, I don't know how you put a ceiling on what this team can do.
Do you ever I mean, this doesn't come into or hasn't come into our context since we've been covering the team, but just, I know a lot of people covering the Nuggets, right? That are I consider friends in the business, and or even like the Warriors, right? And they have these windows of time, and they're really good for 5-8 years or something like that. I, as a casual observer from the outside looking at it, it's like once those teams kind of get into like year 3, 4, 5 of their I don't know, dynasty or like prolonged success, there's almost something that's like dragging about that. Like the Warriors are just dragging themselves to the postseason. The Nuggets are just trying to avoid an injury. They're trying to sustain. They're trying to do all this. And, it's even like the Clippers of late, this whole, like, we have established we're really good. We're trying to survive the regular season so as to be really good when the games matter most. And I get that mentality and all that. I think for all of those teams, the first year is the most fun because it isn't this like pulling along. You're defining yourself then. Like the Warriors year 5 in defined themselves 3-4 years before that and are just trying to hold on to that identity and make it still float. And the Wolves are like, they got a big boat. And they're trying to figure out how much it leaks, and I think for me covering it makes it a lot more fun. Or I even like picture if this year does go well and these next 2, 3, 4 years do go well, I don't think anything is going to be as fun or at least as new and fun as this period of time is going to be. And that's going to include losses too. It's like, it's going to be the roller coaster of emotions. And, they win the 7 straight. They understandably lose in Phoenix, but there's a tough week coming up, like very different Pelicans team than they played a few weeks ago. Like I watched them play Dallas. They look good. They killed Dallas. The Knicks, we talk about physicality and how maybe that's going to kind of be the book out on the Wolves after we saw that's how Golden State guarded them. Like the Knicks are going to try and beat them up on Monday. Then you play one of the best teams in the NBA on Wednesday and the Sixers. And like they could lose a few here. They could lose a streak of games. And what I like is that's unknown, and we don't know how that's going to feel along that path. We don't know how these next 71 games are going to feel. And I just think there's something cool about not knowing what that feeling is. And it makes me personally want to like dig in deeper in the micro to understand, to be able to guess what is going to go well, what isn't going to go well, and, kind of play detective with this. I think this season is going to be so fun for those reasons.
It is very odd that the year 2 of a marriage is way more enjoyable than the first year, right? Like usually you get married and that first year is a lot of fun. It's the honeymoon phase. And that is just the Timberwolves experience, right? As our guy Barf would say, like it's the Wolves are actually having the most fun in year 2. And year 1 was like, do we make a mistake getting married? So it is interesting. And I'm with you on, and to go back to the little nitpicks I had of the Suns game and maybe Finch playing his guys too much. Chris Finch is still a man who knows way more about this team than I will ever know. And maybe he, in the moment, was like, I don't want to downshift from 4th gear to 1st gear because we're going to need to ramp it up again to 4th gear as quickly as, on Saturday against the Pelicans. So maybe he wanted to, from a workout analogy, like maybe he didn't want to just give those guys a complete day off. Maybe he wanted them to get their laps in, get their cardio up a little bit to stay because, like you said, now it's a different schedule coming up with like a Pelicans team that's completely different, a Knicks team. And like you said, the book is out on them now that physicality is probably the way to kind of deter
isn't that
team.
what you would do if you were like, 100%. We're coaching whoever and you're like, our team does not have as much talent as the Wolves. Like, you're going to do the physical thing because they're
Because
bigger than you.
well, and you were there on Tuesday for the Warriors game, but the Warriors punched them or choked them in the mouth or whatever, and they did respond, right? They won the game, but they didn't respond. I mean, if you want a criticism of that, they didn't respond as fast as I would have hoped. Like, it was pretty ugly for 3.5 quarters of that game. So I don't think the team has a glass jaw by any means, but it took them a little while to get up to their feet again on Tuesday in a game that, I mean, I watched the Warriors again last night play the Thunder, and they had guys back like Clay, and they just got run out of their own building. That's what the Wolves should have done on Tuesday. So, again, backup point guard, we don't really have that answer. An inability to kind of mix in some of the younger players that eventually, I mean, I always think, too, Josh Minot's like 5 years in the league. He's been here for like 18 months,
20,
so we can give him some breaks. But, I know like Leonard Miller was dominating down the G League. I know he got hurt last night and questionable about his leg. But just in general, it'd be nice to take opportunities like the Suns game and just mix in a younger player or give a guy an opportunity because there's still questions that need to be answered. I think like Finch is kind of cutting it down to an 8-man rotation too. Like we're already, despite all the depth, we're already really grinding out wins, which is great. That's what we're supposed to do. Everyone wanted this team to start fast, but I don't want to lose sight of the bigger picture because 8-3 is awesome, but it is 11 games, right? Like it's less than 20% of the season. There's still a lot of season left to come. The schedule is going to remain hard for the near future. So overall, take a deep breath. 8-3 is not where I thought they'd be. That's just a lot of wins, especially after we tried to sell the team and move the team after the Hawks game. But they got their day off on Thursday. They got their day off on Friday. They're in New Orleans now. They got to rest. Let's see, right? Let's see if they can start in fourth gear on Saturday against the Pelicans. Because if they come out with a dud, then you're going to start to have some of that scar tissue kind of leak back into your brain.
But again, that's what's fun, right? Is like,
oh my God,
I don't know what they are going to do against the Pelicans. I don't like throw around the term like identity probably way too often, but like I know I'm much more pleased with the identity of this group than I thought I would be, or certainly than I was a year ago. But there's some question marks I have about that. I don't mean that in like a negative question mark way, but like I'm excited to see what the answer to those question marks are. I'm excited to see the next team that they play that tries to play them super physical. And maybe that is Saturday against the Pelicans too. I mean, it's Valanciunas, Zion, like that's a big team there as well. So I guess I'm finding myself going into games significantly more intrigued from a matchup standpoint to, an identity standpoint, more so like not what is the Wolves' identity, but how do opponents try and attack what they think the Wolves' identity is? Because we're all kind of still trying to figure out who and what this team is. All we really know is they're good. Like they're solid. They're better than solid. And that in and of itself is completely new here.
And if you go look at the schedule throughout the whole 82, this was one of, if not the longest road trips. They have a couple other like 5 or 6 game ones, but there's some days mixed in where maybe they head back home. So I'm not giving excuses or being apologetic to the team. But I remember Finch actually told me a couple of years ago when I was covering like a Blazers game that like the goal is always on these road trips is just try to come out of them above 500 because they are a drag. Even if you fly commercial or like you charter flights and all that stuff and you get all the Four Seasons points, like it still is a grind to be on the road for 10 days. They might actually just punt on the New Orleans game too, right? And finish at 3-2. I'm really excited to see how they respond next week. 3 home games, but against all really good teams, including I think there's a in-season tournament game mixed in, which you've been asking everyone. You want my thoughts. I've become such a fan of it. I'm embarrassed. I have nicknamed Adam Silver Adam Skimver for his addiction to underwear partnerships, but I think he hit the one out of the park here because these games do have an extra level of juice to them. But yeah, I'm excited to see how they return home. I think they're undefeated at home, right? Like, those 3 games next week with the holidays mixed in and players probably have family and stuff coming to town, those will be the games that really, no matter what happens against the Pelicans, they should still win. But I'm excited to see them get home, regroup, get back to their routine, and how do they – because, again, if all of a sudden you're 8-7, we're not going to care as much about the 7-game winning streak. Like, this is still very much a race in the West where you need to keep pace and keep winning because teams like a Golden State or some of these teams that are floundering now, one of them is going to figure it out, right? The Clippers or the Warriors, someone's going start to string together wins, and you don't want to have regrets that you, again, downshifted to first gear in November. Keep sprinting, keep speeding, accumulate as many wins as possible, and we'll dissect Wendell Moore's minutes along the way as like a champagne problem.
It's interesting, and I don't totally love the concept of like good wins and bad wins or moral victories.
No,
and that
every
sort of
win
thing.
the Timberwolves have is a good win.
It is. There have been, right, there's 4 piles, right? There's good wins, there's ugly wins, there's good wins, there's bad wins, there's good losses, and there's bad losses.
Yep.
What this team has is a handful of good wins, a couple of bad wins, a couple of bad losses. They don't have any good losses yet. You know, where you're like, hey, they played really well. The other team played better. You know, it's like something just wasn't right there. I think sometimes you learn things about teams in that. I don't want this Wolves team to be like a team that wins or loses like they did in Phoenix. And I think, again, the reason they lost like they did in Phoenix was because they were tired and Phoenix is a good team. But like, I want there to be some productivity out of every game, and I didn't feel like there was much there. So I don't know. Maybe that'll end up being stupid, but it's going to probably happen at some point.
We said it at the top. I've had some stuff going on this week. I have clearly mailed in this podcast. You can see it in my eyes and hear it in my voice. But the next time I get on the mic, people are going to expect that we have a good podcast again. And so you can give the Suns game a pass, but you get 2 days off. You got to eat really well and chill and sleep and shop. Like, come out and show that you're the best defensive team in the league on Saturday. Don't just be like, last game before the road trip ends, let's go home. That'll be a really telling sign, and then go back and see how much pride they take in having what we talked about last week, like a real home court advantage. That place is insane. Sure. It's loud. It's cold. Like, continue to make Target Center a place that other teams don't even want to play their guys. So really, really good moment, really good last stretch of games. I will say, I think when we did our preview pod, our predictions pod, I might have called that they'll have a 7-game winning streak. So already hit that one. They might trade Kyle Anderson take is probably not as fiery right now, but everyone's good. Everyone's healthy. If anyone knows anything about Leonard Miller and his G League fall, please tweet me, because I love that kid and I hope he's okay. But they've got a really good stretch of games. And anyone who hasn't gone to a game yet, you're going to all of them at home. Go check it out, because it sounds like it's a 10 out of 10 experience right now with how they're playing and how the fans are reacting.
Let's bring in Dan Bowling. We'll go a little bit bigger picture on what the season has been, and let's talk a little bit about this ownership thing, because that has a lot of tentacles to it. We'll be back in a second with Dan Bowling. All right, we are now joined by Dan Bowling. Dan, you've kind of become our ownership correspondent here, as we've talked about the Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry ownership transition from Glenn Taylor. You and I started talking a couple of years ago just about Mark Lowry and who he is and what he is. And obviously, I didn't know Mark Lowry from John Doe when he was part of the purchase agreement for this team. So I've been learning about him. I've been learning about the importance of what ownership means to a team. You have some relationship with Mark and some perspective on who and what he is and what he can envision for where this team is going. We also have the third and final ownership payment coming up here in a month or so. Want to talk about that a little bit too. We have Kyle Tighe with us as well. But Dan, I'll just kick it to you at first. When we've talked, you haven't just talked about ownership. You've talked about how ownership trickles down into the fabric of a team, from the players to the employees to all of that. And, when we talked, I gave you a little bit of eye-rolly stuff the first time we chatted out here. But
you weren't alone. You weren't alone. X fired up at me. It's all good.
But the culture has changed. And maybe part of it was always going to change over the course of, you have a star player ascending and Ant has fueled some of that. But in what ways have you felt a new ownership group impact the culture and functionality of the Minnesota Timberwolves?
Yeah, well, it's weird to be on here as the business guy. I should be taking lessons from you guys. So number 20, right, in all basketball podcast, number 162. I looked this morning, up 18 spots. So, hey, I mean, it's awesome, right? So the number one precursor to success is consistency, and you've shown up every day. You've done the hard work. So, hey, congrats to both of you, and thanks for letting me be a part of it. Yeah, what we've always kind of talked about is like filtering and consuming Wolves content really through like this business lens. And it really does start at the top. There's nothing more important than ownership. And that's why there's franchises that are not great for years, like the last 20 years for us. Mm-hmm. And there's some franchise that no matter what, they just still find a way to always be relevant. And because it starts at the top. And it really is about a couple things. It's about culture, right? But it all starts with a vision. And their vision, according to Mark and the team, is to be the best of the best with separation, which is awesome. Who doesn't want to be a part of that, right? So, when you think about like the company, we all have jobs. What do you love about your job? What do you hate about your job? Like the people that love their jobs and give what we call discretionary effort, right? That extra effort that you don't have to. It's because the company's got a vision that you like. You feel like you're a part of a bigger story. You like your teammates. You even want them to be successful, right? And you're just excited to get to work every day and like do your best. And the engagement stats, like in this country, for like employees that are just totally like not even paying attention throughout the course of the day, are at an all-time high because nobody's doing that for the most part, right? Like people aren't happy when they go to work. They don't feel like they're accomplishing anything. There's no purpose. So for me, it was super excited, right? I said, and everybody's made fun of me for it. There's nobody I wanted to buy the team more than Mark Laurie. And it's fun for me to be here now. And I don't want to say I told you so, but things are moving in the right direction. And it literally does all start at the top. It always does for every company. And pro sports is a company. Like this is a business that we're talking about. The business is just to entertain us, hopefully.
Dan made a really good point, and I want to get this cleared before we move forward. I have a full-time job in finance, and I'm recording this podcast after that job. So when Dan talks about lack of engagement in people's careers, guilty. But I just want to say again, I clocked out. So this is we're coming to you live on my Friday afternoon. But no, also too, as Dane, quickly, you deserved your flowers for all the success. We got to shout out Dan too, because Dan has played a big role in supporting this podcast and letting people like me and Britt and other people come on and kind of make a living out of this. So we appreciate you, sir. But this is like, as much as I love Josh Minot or Leonard Miller or Jaden, like this is my passion, is sports and sports business. And you have, like Dane said, probably the closest person we have kind of to this new ownership group that, wants to come on and hang out and talk to us. I also just think it's weird, and I kind of just want to ask the both of you, because Dan has a good relationship with Mark Laurie, and I am proudly a fan first and foremost. I don't think fans typically like the owner of their team. You know what I mean? Like, so that's just like a natural thing for fans to, because we just can't relate to their lifestyle. They have billions of dollars. So I think typically you come into any sports team and you're like, we don't like the owner. We like the GM. We like the coach. My weird feeling in all of this for these last 2 years since they came in is like, what have they done wrong? And I want to be extra critical of rich people I never get to see or talk to. I don't know what they've done wrong. Like, I guess the one point would be is there was, some people maybe thought that the Rudy Gobert trade was ownership influenced, and that was a time for me to be critical. Well, I don't know. Aside from paying a little too much, like Rudy Gobert is the best defensive player in the league. So that might be another moment where Mark and Alex kind of hit a double or a triple. So it's been interesting. But yeah, as much as you see the emphasis of new ownership, Dan, to go big game hunting and get Tim Conley or extend all these players, or willing to pay the luxury tax, Dane, right, when this thing gets really expensive, there's also a ton of stuff behind the scenes. And I know it's stupid, but like just the cultural stuff they're doing in the sales department, or painting the walls, or redoing parts of Target Center to make it more modern. I think that's the type of stuff that Dan can comment on. Dane, you can comment on it. You're seeing it all the time. Like, that stuff also matters, because what Dan's point is and my point is, these athletes are actually way more similar to us than you think. And they're just human beings. And professional sports are something that I'll never be able to do unless it's pickleball. But you forget sometimes that these people are just on their phones like us and just text and tweet like us. And I think that culture thing that Dan wants to talk about is really big.
Dan, my question is, so all these things, right? We have seen a change in the culture. We've seen the paintings on the wall. We've seen all that. Like, the Wolves look different than they did before. I think it's a fair question to ask, though. Like, how much does the new ownership group have to do with that, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it is, Glenn has still been, like, if we're really pleased with like what the Wolves have done over the last few years, like, Glenn's been in charge. Ethan Casson has been the CEO. Like, I'm not saying that obviously there's been influence from this new money coming in, but like, to what extent is that Mark and Alex, and to what extent will it change once it's all Mark and Alex? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And, one of the things, as I've gotten to know Mark, and I'm not like the spokesperson for them, or I'm not even a reporter. When I talk to him about his business and my business. I rarely talk to him about the Timberwolves. Now, he loves the team, and so do I. So it'll kind of come up at the end, which is fun, right? To just banter on, like, try to get what I can out of him because I'm interested. But the reason I talk to him about business is because if I can understand how he thinks about the business and how he wants to run things, once I understand that template, it's easier for me to presume what he's going to do next, which is why I've kind of been able to call it, right? I've called a bunch of things that have come to fruition because I know how they think and how they're going to do things. I'll also say this about him. You do not know when you're sitting with him that he's a billionaire, other than like his $40 million penthouse that I got to sit in. He's just a cool, normal, down-to-earth person, and that really matters. I mean, think about it. If you're an athlete, how much discretionary extra effort are you going to give in to make sure that Donald Sterling's team is successful? Not a lot, but if you really like, the people you're working for, it's human nature, right? You'll give that extra bit. But to answer your question, Dane, people make fun of me for this, 100% credit. And the reason is I have 20 years of data points that suggest otherwise, right? So we see this massive change in everything from paintings on the wall to culture to number one defense. I don't even know if that's ever happened. So we have this massive change, and there's only one thing that has changed: new ownership, right? And I was on here a year and a half ago saying, watch out. They have a vision to be the best of the best with separation. And here we are. We got data points to prove it. And I'll be honest, they're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. They're going to screw things up, no doubt about it. But my whole take was, you're going to get to a place where this team's going to be something you're proud of. And here we are. We're proud of it. Like, now we're mad because we're not on national television enough, and we should be. Like, we finally deserve it, right? So we've come a long ways from like players complaining about the floor or whatever.
Right.
It's
right.
awesome.
I was just going to say, so first of all, credit to Dane. We've given him flowers. Credit to Dan. Now I think I want to be critical just for devil's advocate, because I too kind of agree with Dan that a lot of this stuff, even though Glenn Taylor Dane is still listed at the top of the masthead or whatever, there's just been way too many small instances of serious change, modern change, that I have no other option to just credit the new owners, right? Even though Glenn is still steering the ship. But if we're going to credit Alex and Mark for all these little things that they're doing behind the scenes, especially during times that, like they stepped in to try to clear up the culture stuff and the behind the scenes stuff when the Rosas thing happened, and they've stood behind Finch and extended all his assistants. So all that stuff is great. I'm just saying that if they want to be the best of the best, and this team is now the best of the best when it comes to defense, and they're good and they have a new floor and a much higher ceiling, I want that same mentality and that same mantra to come out when they have to fork over the check for the second apron, or when they want to start. I mean, I know we're closer to Mark here than we are to Alex, but like when Alex did that radio hit a couple months ago and just came out of the blue and said, we're going to privately fund a stadium. I'd heard some of that stuff too, but it's like, okay, well, if 10 months from now, when you have the keys to the building and you start sniffing around at public funding, something I'm pretty against, I just want that, it's like, keep that same energy, right? A lot of the good things that they've done so far, but now that this team is a contender, is really good, I'm hopeful that they acknowledge the discount that they got on the team and that they will use that value that they've already gained in buying this team to keep investing, right? Because as a business owner, it's not just about those first 24 months of investment. It's, you know, can they make this sustainable? We waited 35 years to have a sustainable contender. New ownership is going to play a big part in that.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I mean, I think we could have a whole topic on going into the second apron if that's wise, right? I mean, the CBA really made that kind of detrimental to success. So, you know, I think that's a whole topic in and of itself. What I know is they're going to do everything they can to do one thing, and that's to create stability, because stability is what allows for consistency. And you can be great at anything in the world. You can get one of the top podcasts in the city or the country. You can become the best violin player, whatever it is, if you consistently show up and do the work every single day. So I think that they're going to put everything together to be consistent. And like, you know, I've said that from day one. And then what did they do? When they came in, they signed up everybody to long-term contracts. CEO, COO, the whole front office, basically the whole team, the whole coaching staff, and nobody's left, which is crazy. So there's like another data point that everybody signed those things, excited for the future, right? Like pop quiz. There's a name out there. We used to talk about this guy all the time, and now nobody talks about him anymore. He's in the front office. He's still there, which is incredible that he's still there because he got demoted. Stoch is still there. So, I mean, there's little things like that where I look at this and it's like what they're building is real and it's tangible and everybody's all in, right? So that's pretty exciting. You know, will they go all in and pay for the second apron? I think we have a long season to go. Let's see. Like if we're really like the championship trophy's right there, you know, I think that's a little bit different because then maybe you can do some of the things that I think are like prohibitory towards winning long-term, right? And actually do the team a disservice within that second apron. But that's a big check, man. It's a big check. So we will see. I don't know.
It's a big
I have some
cash
thoughts
check
on it.
too.
It's a big cash check, and I don't know if that leads to long-term success, but we'll see. We got a long.
I like this topic
season.
though. I think this is because right, like whenever this. Again, Kyle, you were right. I don't think ownership's on a ton of people's minds right now. It probably will be in a month when we starts becoming some reporting on this next payment, and then it'll be a major topic of conversation this summer as it pertains to the luxury tax. Dan, I think you're right in pointing out that paying the second apron just in and of itself, like maybe that isn't a path to stability. It is a crazy number. I mean, just we can't project that stuff out exactly, but we're talking if they go over that, which would just be like bringing back like Mike Conley and Kyle Anderson, just like running it back to run it back again. I mean, we are talking about $130 to $150 million in just a luxury tax payment, right? I mean, like. And you don't get the disbursement then from the other teams that are paying the luxury tax. So that's like a 1 year, $150 million like difference. Yeah, they could be like extremely rich, but that is such a number right there that I guess my just hope with all of it is that these things are a conversation. There's no hard and fast rules about we're not paying the tax, or there aren't hard and fast rules about we're going to crazy spend, because what happens when businesses irrationally spend, they pay for it back down the line. What is the stable mark? And you're right, Dan, of like, where is this team at that time? I think what Wolves fans just want to know is that if reasonable, this ownership will spend a reasonable amount. And maybe the second apron exceeding that is not a reasonable amount. I think it is fair to say that paying into the first luxury tax apron, or before the second apron, is reasonable. We are learning it is a pattern and a requirement for contention in the league to pay some additionally, let go of that disbursement, let go of some of that cheapness, as most people would call it. It's just this is tough. I mean, that payment would be a year from now, And this ownership group has not even completed their payments on just buying the team. Like, this is a loaded thing for me. And it is going to be their answers to these questions are going to be defining not just of next season, but for the next decade. Who and how these owners operate will have a huge determining factor on the success of this franchise. Before we brought you on, Dan, Kyle and I were talking about some of these ideas of like what Golden State has been for the last like 8 years, sustained success, which looks like Denver's going to be doing. Like, those are long and grading experiences that you need to be planning for well in advance. And I don't personally know enough about this organization group to know how and where they are going to pursue it. I take your word and other people's words who know these people, know the patterns of their behavior and other business and business ventures that suggests they will be. I just want to kind of know. And I'm just curious, when are we going to know more of these things? When are we going to know about this payment, Dan? Like, what's going on at the end of December? Do you know the answer to that?
Yeah, they have a right to option, right? They can exercise the option to buy the last 40% tranche that was offered to them, which would be then they would own Lori and A-Rod 80%, right? So there's still that 20% outstanding that's never.
They currently own 40.
Where that's going. They own, yeah. So they can buy up to the other 40% tranche. So they exercise that right in December, and then they have till March to make the payment. So here's what we do know. Though, right? So all we can do is kind of make assumptions off what we do know. They've got a vision to be the best of the best with separation. So that's not like
I've heard that.
That's not second place. That's not second or third place, right? And that's sustained success, right? And what's exciting is they want the same things we want, which isn't always the case for owners, right? Sometimes owners don't want to win. Sometimes because of rev share and everything else, it's okay not to win. But when they want the same things we want, right? To be entertained, to win, to be part of something special, to be taken seriously. You know, A-Rod's not used to being in flyover country. Like, I think he wants to change that whole mantra. You know, to have our players, specifically Ant, maybe be the face of the franchise, right? So some of it's really exciting because when you talk about a vision like that, what happens is like fans get more engaged, right? So then there's increased revenue. Then there's an increased likelihood to spend more money, right? So there's some insight. You get then a better external culture, which we haven't really talked about. But part of the reason I'm interested in talking about viewing all of these moves through this business landscape is basically saying let's put ourselves in their shoes and remember that they're humans, right? Because the fans have like an important role in this whole discussion of culture, which we'll get to. But as that gets better, then that begets a better chance of free agents, right? A better chance of corporate sponsorships, which means more revenues, which means a better stadium, which means more revenues. And the flywheel starts to turn where all of a sudden it's a little bit easier to write that check. But right now you got the second worst stadium, at least oldest and probably worst in the NBA. Until like what? I don't know, 12 days ago, you had a team that was underachieving, right? That was expensive. So 12 days ago, we would have said, there's no way they're going to write a check. Well, you wouldn't write the check. But we'll see how the season plays out. Like if that Larry O'Brien trophy is like 1 inch away, you know, it's a lot easier to put pen to paper. So the other thing I know, there was an incredible amount of excitement that Naz Reid was signed. Incredible amount of excitement that they overpaid for. Now, there's some things that we've talked about on the show. Like it just points back to the culture, right? And it points back to he believes what they're building. He's not worried about, you know, all the draft picks they got from Rudy, right? So there was some really cool things there. But, you know, was that a sign that they might have a future starting four if the CBA makes them, right, have to trade somebody? I don't know. That's just pure speculation. But I do know that they love stability. That's why they signed up everybody, front office and in between. It's a long term. And the longer you can keep a team together, the better they work. You know, we know super teams don't work.
By the way, I love this stuff, so I'm glad we had Dan on. I will just say, like when we asked Dan how much credit goes to new ownership, I'm guessing some people rolled their eyes when we say 100%. I'm just going to be fully honest. Like, I'm with Dan. Like, the stuff I hear too, which is at a lesser level than Dan, like, I'm with Dan that new ownership has just made a great change to this stuff. And I know people just want to hear about plus minus and net rating and stuff, but like the culture stuff is what I love too. But at the end of the day, I mean, Dane, like, I think you would say for this company that you've built, I'm your number 2, right? And I can move the needle and I can say crazy stuff and I can do some cool business stuff. But at the end of the day, man, you would have to fall on the sword, right? It's your company. And my thing is that and I think Dan will agree with this, it still is easier to do some of this stuff and have these risks and make these trades and do this stuff when it's not your name on the masthead yet, right? It's still Glenn that has to sign the checks and do this stuff. So my thing is, like, they've basically not missed, other than maybe a misstep on how much they paid for Rudy. But they also weren't the ones that at the end of the day they had to report. Like, it was still Glenn's team at that point. I'm curious, and Dane, this is what you're saying. What's it going to be like when they are the people, when they are the ones that all of the good or bad gets directed, right at them? And those are things like a new stadium. Because I'm with Dan that Target Center, as much as I love it and I've grew up there, like, they need to replace it. They need to have a more modern arena. But I also don't believe that any fan base on earth should have to contribute a cent to it less than the Timberwolves fans, who have stayed loyal throughout all this with the worst ROI in terms of success on the court. So, can they find that funding for a new stadium to make it more modern? They have a really good practice facility. Can they find that money to, I think we all agree that they know that they bought the team at 1.52 million at billion at a discount. Will they understand that value of, like, the Larry O'Brien is 2 feet away. We're going to pay $130 million check to make sure that we don't lose grip of trying to achieve the goal of being the best of the best and not being second, right? Because a lot of owners would not cash that check and be okay with just being the runner-up for the Larry O'Brien. And those are things that, other than talking to you, Dan, we just don't know, right, Dane? We just don't know yet. We've seen a lot of singles and doubles, but we haven't seen an ownership home run.
Yeah, well, and we've also seen other organizations proposed with similar cost things. And them being the two that come to mind for me first are the Clippers and the Warriors of late, who the Clippers have probably the richest owner in professional sports, and Warriors are probably making as much revenue of anyone. And yet both of those teams have made roster moves that avoid this second apron or paying these crazy amount of taxes, which was the goal of this collectively bargained by the players and the owners, new collective bargaining agreement that put this rule in place. And we can all roll our eyes at it. And I think Wolves fans have a reasonable gripe to be like, what? This rule came in right once we're a team that is ready to actually spend a lot of money. Like, that sucks, but it was a collectively bargained thing. We're seeing teams already dodging it. Like, if I had to guess, forecasting it forward, like, A-Rod and Laurie probably aren't going to spend as much as you want them to. I'm talking to the fans here. Like, they just probably aren't, because Steve Ballmer didn't. The Warriors didn't. Other teams faced with this are too. And I kind of said this earlier, Dan, where it's like, all right, if we're not going to get every single thing that we want, we're still going to get a lot, though, right? I think that should be the reasonable stance of the fan base, is a willingness to spend that has not been there during the Glenn Taylor era predominantly. And a plan for stability, and a plan that even if they don't write the $130 million check, a plan that makes you believe they're still trying, and that's been my frustration with the Glenn Taylor era, is a lot of the time it didn't feel like they were trying, and willing to maybe not go all the way in, but get close there.
I have a question, because I know Dan can answer this directly.
Oh boy.
No, Dan, we've talked about this offline. So this payment coming up in December, not on a lot of people's radars, but very much, I think, maybe the most important thing I think about daily, or it kicks into early 2024. And some of the stuff that the reporting or, rumors coming around all this as this next phase steps up, and it's a big one to go from 40 to 80, is the potential for this new ownership group. They've always questioned, the outsiders have questioned this Mark and Alex's ability to raise money, or how much money do they have, right? Like how many bored apes does Alex Rodriguez have in his portfolio? But you have told me offline a little bit that like Mark Laurie is really good at raising money. And that's not going to be an issue. And I feel like that's why you've been maybe the calmest one of amongst all of us, is that you've got to know him a little bit, and you know that when it comes to pushing this thing across the finish line, the reason you're not concerned is layered, but one of them is just right. Mark just knows how to raise money and is really good at doing that, and that's how you buy a team, is raising money.
Well, yeah. So you're trying to get me fired up halfway through the show. Like as frustrated as you were, I think at the fans. I'm trying to remember the game that you got on and went off on people. It was after like San Antonio or one of those games. If you see me, I try to like maintain a very low profile. Don't want to be famous. Don't want to be bothered. Yeah. When I go on Twitter pushing back, it's because I've like somebody has pissed me off. So I have a list. Let's go into it later, but I have a list of 11 reasons why it's like absurd to worry about this. So if you don't want to listen to the rest of the podcast, just know zero concern that they won't close on this thing. There's never been an issue. There won't be an issue. To your, one of the bullet points I'll give you as a teaser. He is the greatest, literally the greatest of all time at raising funds. So, and you've brought it up twice. So not distressed, but an asset that's, lower than value. Yeah. Super easy to go raise money for something that's already appreciated before you even own it. So don't worry at all about that. And later in the show, I'll give you the 11 things. But I want to talk about, first of all, the new stadium thing. I apologize. I could have broke that news to you on our last podcast. A-Rod did it the next day on Barrero. I wasn't sure how to like do it because I wasn't supposed to say it explicitly. So what I kind of said on the show, and it's like hard to read through the lines or between the lines. So if you're listening, try to listen between the lines here. But how I said it was like, hey, this stadium, they're going to view it as an asset, right? That will generate revenue every minute that they'll want full control of, right? So that was my way of saying like, they don't want public money because with public money comes public control, or you got to report to some board or whatever. So yeah, no, they're going to privately finance this thing. It's not going to be a stadium. It's going to be an asset. They're going to play basketball games in it, as well as a bunch of other stuff that stadium would be used for, because this guy is the greatest entrepreneur, I think, in our country, right? So just think of like, hey, what do you give somebody as brilliant and bright as him? Like, what would he do with an asset that happened to just be a building that his own sports team could play in? So let your imagination go wild, and you'll probably get somewhat close to what he wants to do. But why I actually give him tons of credit isn't because, like, I don't necessarily agree with the standpoint of they're able to kind of like hide behind Glenn right now. I actually do give Glenn a ton of credit, because I think he's let them do things that they wanted to do. Right. So all of these things that we've talked about that they've done, like the 20 years prior, never were done. Right. Signing up competent people, bringing in people like Connolly, the financial package there, keeping people like Sachin, bringing in coaching, the whole coaching staff like stayed. Right. It's incredible how many people have stayed. Naz Reid didn't even test free agency. So all these things like are happening now that never happened before. And I actually, for me, so my company, I came to terms that I was going to buy it in 2016. I didn't get full ownership till 2020. And that time process in there where you're going to be in charge, but you're not yet, is really difficult. And I think A-Rod and Lori have done a great job of getting some of their agendas through Glenn without frustrating him, while giving him public credit, even though us that are paying attention are like, that's Glenn wouldn't have traded for Rudy, right? I mean, there's no way that wasn't new ownership. So I think that they've done a good job navigating that. And part of the issues, which we'll talk about later on, like on the rumors of can they pay for it, where they bought on layaway, it's just because the structure of this thing was so weird.
Can we get into that? Because I think so long. Yeah. So you're talking about here, we're talking about we're talking about three separate serious financial payments that they have to have. We've already talked about the luxury tax, which that is indeterminate, but a lot of money if they want to pay for it. They have to make this final tranche payment, which is a lot of money in and of itself. Again, also cash. And then they have this building that they are presumably wanting to build and have said on the record that they are going to do privately funded. So that is, I think what a lot of people do is they go, wait, why is this going so slow with the financial payments? And why are we hearing that? Why are we hearing things that maybe they're not all the way ready to make all these payments yet, when it's only for something they already committed to doing, which was buying the team? It's only another like $400 million or whatever that they owe for the payment here. And people are like, okay, Mark Lord, just $900 million valuation on Wonder and this, and he's, you look up his net worth and you go, wait, why have there been all these seeming stalls along the way of just making the payment for the ownership of the team? And am I wrong in putting together that what they're actually doing is raising money for not just this $400 million final payment, but probably $1 billion project, or over $1 billion project, of building a whole new stadium, which that, if we go from 400 million to $1.5 billion, maybe that's what the delay is here. Are you following with what I'm saying here, Dan?
That's a few suburbs in Tolosa that you're going to have to downsize.
Yeah. Well, let me answer your first question.
Okay. That was like 7 questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they didn't negotiate the terms. They're buying it in tranches because that's what Glenn wanted. Mm-hmm. Like, they publicly stated.
Why did Glenn want to do that? Why did Glenn want to have it be like this?
I have no idea.
Control for a couple more years. Okay, we don't know that.
But I can assume that he saw that things were going on the right trajectory, right? That he's wanted to sell this for years and have kind of backed out, right? And maybe he finally saw that things were going the right trajectory. And as critical as I've been of Glenn, if this thing goes, when this thing goes through, they got to do two things: get that KG, back in the fold, in the rafters, and then put a statue of Glenn up. That guy kept the team here, and from my standpoint, sold it to the best owners he could possibly sell it to. Did it in a smart way. This isn't a dumb way to sell a team. It's just uncommon. And most of the time it doesn't happen because billionaires have too much pride, right? I want it now. But they had a chance to come in and learn the operations from Glenn, good, bad, or indifferent. But along the way, Glenn followed their lead, it seems, right? As far as like bolstering up the biggest front office, I think, in the league, but definitely the Wolves have ever had. Same with all these new, the first time they've ever have a comms director, which is incredible if you know anything about marketing or running a division. Or running a company. So I think Glenn did a good job actually in structuring it this way. For me, not that I'm comparing my company to $1 billion franchise, but the old owner was here for 35 years. And I knew that I was going to be owner in 2020. But I had to wait 5 years, and it was awesome. It was difficult because there's stuff I wanted to do. And if I would have, doing it kind of signals to him I didn't like what he was doing. But I got to learn straight up exactly everything that he had to go through. And he always told me every day, he goes, "You're never going to know how hard it is to sit in my chair until you sit in it." And I rolled my eyes. Then I saw after 5 years how hard it was. And now that I sit there, oh my God. God bless people that run small businesses, and why we only help entrepreneurs. And I'm proud of you, Dane. So anyway,
but that's a great point, though.
Glenn gave.
That's a great point. And I think that's what we need to bring up, is that the Timberwolves are always just the butt of jokes, right? Like, let's spin this back off of business for a second. Just like, they've never really done things right or the smart way. But every time a team gets sold, whether it be the Commanders in football or the Suns, like, Dan is kind of actually educating me on the fly here. It's always just super rich people that come in and want to, like, I'll figure it out. Just give me the keys. Let me hire some guys, trade for a guy. Like, I'll figure it out. And I think we've made fun of Mark and Alex because they're on this 24-month layaway plan. Like, you would buy Christmas gifts, for your friends when you're 18 years old at Walmart. But I keep hearing that, like, they did want to learn, Dan. As much as we kind of, like, make fun, like, they did just want to, like, have time to figure this all out and do it in an uncommon way. And we just are so not used to, Dane, things being done in a weird way, right? We're not used to, in 2023, 2 7-footers playing on the court together. We're not used to rich people that are semi-famous or that we don't know buying an asset and be like, we're going to be patient with it, and we're not going to We're not just going to try to do this thing overnight. So I appreciate, Dan, that kind of insight, because this is weird. And anytime the Timberwolves do something that is weird or different, they're going to get crushed, because the track record retroactively has been that when they do things differently, it never works. So I think that's why fans have angst or nervousness. But what you're trying to say is it makes sense. Like, it makes sense that they're trying to raise all this money and do it in a controlled way that, back to your term, is like sustainable, right? This isn't about a short-term press conference about winning the room. It's about, like, how do I do this for 10 years, not for 10 months?
Yeah, I mean, a few things on there. Yes, billionaires are normally successful, right? So they come into like, we're going to take over. We know how to do things. We're going to bring our own people in. Mark, as I said earlier, I already said this today. He is one of the most down-to-earth, cool, values-driven, normal dudes in the world. He listens. He like lets me ask him questions and listens to me instead of just telling me what I should do when I talk to him. So I think that there's some humility, and one of the reasons why I clearly think so highly of the guy is who his character is. But the whole notion, I got to kill this right now, that they bought the team on layaway is totally incorrect. What they did was purchase the shares that were available to be bought every time they were available to be bought. Like, that's how the Timberwolves owner, Glenn, allowed the company of the Timberwolves to be purchased. So it wasn't on layaway. So let's go through some other things now that you got me going here. All right. So first of all, when I heard some of the reports that are out there, let's look at the sources, right? League sources. There's nobody in the NBA that knows these guys. These guys are not even from the NBA, right? So if you hear sources from like Bain Capital, or like Blackstone, like that might be a reason to be concerned, because those are the folks that would know the financial matrix of these guys. But more importantly, like, they came to the table knowing it was going to be a $1.5 billion valuation. We all knew the valuation. It was public. So they didn't come to the table, right, and not have the money. Like, you don't get invited to the party if you don't have the money, which I'll talk about here in a second. The fact that it had to be bought over a couple years, that came out, and this is public too, in those meetings, right? So that was something that Glenn wanted. And what they said was two things. They said they didn't negotiate on the sale price, and they didn't negotiate on the terms because they thought it was a good deal. Do you know what a good deal is? A good deal is one you can afford. Do you know what you negotiate? Stuff you can't afford. So the fact that they didn't negotiate it, that they accepted his terms, was the fact that they knew it was a really good deal, because it is a really good deal if you want to keep the team here, which they did. So those are a couple of things where it's like, they took the meeting, they had the money, and then what happens is you go through something called due diligence. So anytime big deals like this close, you'll always see on the bottom of the press release, like 2 different accounting firms and 2 different law firms, because the amount of hours and work to go through due diligence to prove that company A is worth what it says it is, right? And company B can afford said price. It's an incredible amount of work. My little company, which is nothing compared to this one, it took me 3 years to close on it because of all the due diligence. And I worked here 10 years beforehand, so I already knew all of that stuff. So the due diligence that goes on is incredible. And I will say this, if they went and they sold, this is Taylor Corp, their company to somebody who couldn't afford it, and the due diligence was done by their accounting firm, and they either knew they couldn't afford it and still sold it, or knew they couldn't afford, or like didn't realize that they couldn't afford it. Like that's negligence, and they should probably be terminated. So like it was all figured out up front if they had the money, and they probably 99% of the time had the money from day one. It's just Glenn asked them to pay for it over time. Now it's just like your mortgage or paying taxes. Don't pay your taxes early. Don't pay your mortgage before you have to. Like, never give somebody money before you have to. Keep your money as long as you can. So why do they wait to the last day? Because it's dumb financially to do otherwise. So that's a couple other things, also, yeah. So Laurie is the greatest of all time raising funds. So he raised $900 million for a company most of you've never heard of, in Wonder. Wonder by itself is worth $3.5 billion. Right? So even more than the Timberwolves. So you take all these things into consideration, plus the fact they've already paid for half of this thing, right? So like they only have to come up with the other 40%. So I think we're so far like into this thing that just understanding how deals go through, the fact that these guys
helpful.
can raise so much money overnight, the fact that he owns other companies like Archer, right, and the valuation there. It's just a little bit crazy to think that they wouldn't be able to come up with the money, and most likely had the money from day one. Otherwise, somebody did a really bad job during due diligence.
There is a difference, though, between owning a company that is valuated at X versus having X cash on hand. That's a fact. But I think a question some people have is, all right, cool. Like Mark Lowry has this huge net worth, and a lot of it is pointed directly to valuations. Am I wrong in saying that maybe that's where some of the skepticism is that there's a difference between what Mark Lowry is valued at in his companies versus what do you understand what I'm saying? The distinction there, Dan?
Yeah, because I was going to bring it up earlier when Kyle talked about how they only paid $1.5 billion for the $2 billion franchise, as if that means they have $500 million more to spend. It's like, just because I got my jacket for $100 off doesn't mean I have like an extra $100 to blow.
Yeah, right.
So, but that's true. But what's not necessarily true is the fact that like, if I own something that's worth, $10 million, I might not have that money because it's tied up in the company. Mm-hmm. However, I can leverage that to get $10 million. That's why banks, private equity, the whole financial sector is based off of assets, right? So yes, he doesn't have $3.5 billion, from Wonder. He has it from other stuff, that he's sold in the past, like Jet. And it's valued at that. But he could also leverage that valuation to get the money. Mm-hmm. So, but the long story short, from my standpoint, is there's been smoke on this deal from day one, right? I mean, there was some problems from day one that were public that got into the newspaper, people trying to hold this thing up. I'm totally speculating at this point, but it's interesting to me that along the way, there's always been like these reports that this thing's troublesome, almost as if there's a certain party out there that doesn't want this thing to close. But if you do large business transactions or involved with them as much as I am, this thing, there's never been an issue. Like there should be zero concern on this thing. Like they had the money from day one that would have been discovered in due diligence 2.5 years ago.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to put Dan on the spot here, but just because I think we've hammered it out now in terms of there is really no concern. I guess the biggest cynic will be critical until the payment actually is announced or reported or whatever, but this thing is moving forward. Along the way, it has only gotten better, whether it be literally the team has made back-to-back playoff appearances since ownership kind of comes into new ownership comes in the fold. The roster is stacked. They're paying for things. They've signed everyone. Like you said, it's not just easy to extend Nas and Jaden and Ant all in a 6-month period and know that you're on the hook for those contracts. But stadium and luxury tax. But I'll throw it back to you because another one that just came in the news this week that is going to be interesting is that with the whole Diamond Sports Group and the Bally Sports thing and how all these NBA teams are essentially all on the same schedule now to end those contracts after this season. I don't necessarily expect Dan to know what the Wolves' plan is for broadcasting games next season, but just hanging around with Mark, Dan, he not only is he good at raising money, but he's also just a really smart dude who is pretty creative. Do you get the sense that they are energetic or excited about the opportunity to kind of do what the Suns did or like create their own way of getting their product to more people in an easier way?
Yeah. So, we can go through the same filter of like how they think about things, right? Mm-hmm. So they know at some level, the greatest asset that they have is the fans, right? We are the ones that make this engine turn. You need fans to buy tickets. You need fans to consume the sport. I am certain, and this is not certain because they've told me, but I am certain that they're somewhat embarrassed at the fact that they can't distribute their product to the people that want to consume it. That's business 101, mm-hmm. right? And it's just like a debacle that I had to do like illegal streams. Don't come after me, FBI or whoever, for like 2 years. And even now the sports app doesn't work. So I think the following. One, I think he's proven to want to do whatever is perfect whatever is best in class. I think they've already shown, because they've got a stacked front office financially, they've got a stacked payroll financially, that they will do financially whatever it takes to get the best product on the court for the fans, right? We also know, if you look at his background and where he made his money, it was in technology, right? So I don't have an answer for you specifically because I haven't asked him, but I could assume with great confidence that whatever they announce next, and they already did some cool stuff with like iHeartRadio, making it a little bit more accessible. But whatever they do next will be, a little bit break mold and something that allows us all to more easily have access to content.
Thank God.
Totally.
It is just one of those crazy situations. I mean, obviously, been talking to a bunch of people about this over the last few weeks. Like, it's just the concept of you have your fan base here ready to consume your product. You have your product, which is good, and that we are not able to plug those things into each other in a way that gets the fans what they want and gets the broadcast company or the team or whoever what they want, which is money. I mean, like, that a reliable option for that in a modern way through an app, through tech or whatever, does not exist is ridiculous. I mean, it is a ridiculous thing that's not isolated to the Timberwolves, right? This is a Diamond Sports thing across whatever that is, like 20 different teams in the league and multiple different sports. But I will say for me, this is the type of stuff that I'm most excited about with Mark Lowry, is that, like, he, and I'm just calling it how I see it. Like, he seems like the type of dude who is going to be like, yeah, Dane, that is ridiculous. Like, what the hell are we doing? We're going to figure that out. Yeah.
Right. Here's an antenna. Yeah. I mean, so I keep bringing it back to culture, which makes people's eyes roll. But like, that's what we're talking about. Like, we're part of this too, right? Like, we're that external culture standpoint. Like, if fans, like, if it's a bad fan experience, if fans are pissed, if fans are screaming, explicit racist words like Boston fans from the sidelines, like, all of that stuff matters to the players and to the culture and how they feel. And if the next, person wants to come on. So that's why, we haven't really even gotten into the meat of the potatoes, and we probably don't have time as far as like viewing things through this business landscape, which really is another way of saying, like, bringing in that human element. Because the fact is, if we're all screaming at Carl because of things he says or his attitude, right? Like, the next Carl is going to be less inclined to want to come here. And the thing is, like, us fans have a responsibility to helping, like, make this a great destination. And the little things matter. They really do. Because we're talking about human beings. And, like, you've seen Kevin Durant go off on social media. It's like amazing how people are like, oh gosh, he's so easy to get pissed off. And it's like, well, he's just like you and me. Imagine if I followed you all day long at work, and the one time you screwed up or you said something stupid in a meeting or you sent the wrong email or whatever, and it was all made public. Like, this is their job. It's in the public sphere. And God, I'm glad that I'm not famous, right? Because they just get attacked for no good reason left and right, because we don't understand or realize that they're humans. We just look at a box score like they're a bunch of machines. So anyway.
I know I speak for Dane, but again, to circle this all the way back and put a bow on it on my end, like, I appreciate the insight you have, because I'm with you on, like, that piranha mentality that sometimes when in 2023, we need to be more cognizant of when we read something of, like, why is that out there? And who would have the best reason for that to get out. So there has been a lot of questions about whether this will get to the finish line. You have been steadfast in your confidence. I think that is important. Again, I know this is in basketball reference, but what good organization is successful without good ownership and strong leadership? I can't think of one. So I think this is a conversation that needs to continue, Dane, right? Like, we need to keep talking to Dan as hopefully this crosses the finish line, and then it opens up to what's next. Like, when Mark and Alex are at the top of the masthead that I keep saying, what will be their first? I mean, they've done a lot behind the scenes, but what will be their first main move after that, right? Is it going to be the stadium? Is it going to be the TV rights? I'm excited for it. Again, I don't think they've made any mistakes, and I've been pretty critical of ownership in the past, but it's just going to get even. It's like anything, Dane, right? When we talk about expectations with the team, when the team's good now, you have heightened expectations. You're going to have more things you're going to nitpick. When the organization is finally strong and deep and everyone's well compensated, I think from any perspective, you're also going to be more critical because, like, okay, we've gotten out of the doldrums of the Western Conference and we've stopped being on tankathon and in the lottery. Now we need to put a, kind of microscope on everything they do moving forward, whether it be financials, with TV, whatever. And I think it's a conversation that, Dan, this won't be the last time we talk to you because it's only going to get more heightened and more important as this thing hopefully continues to grow.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, the number one question I've got, right, is how did you know, right? How did you know that Gobert was going to be great? And it's like, if you look at our last podcast, 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 30 seconds in, I said, I bet this year we'll see a Rudy that nobody even recognizes, right? How did I know they're going to sign Nas and Jaden? How did I know that the Cat would start to kind of fit in and dominate? How did I know the defense would kind of get its act together, really even separate of Rudy? And it's just because, like, I understand the playbook that they've put in place, this culture, and I see, like, what's happening, that people want to be a part of it and the buy-in. So, it's like the people that want to fire Finch, that ain't happening. I mean, it would have to be a flaming Biffy fire where they lose like 40 games for something like that to even remotely come close. So if you're anti-Finch, give up, because they're not letting him go. So anyway, there's all these insights that you can glean from kind of paying attention to how the ownership thinks about things, because that informs how the front office is going to think about things. That informs the coaching staff, how they're going to approach things, which by the way, the culture within the coaching staff is like this phenomenon within NBA circles where they're like, like rooting for each other and have like their own cheer squad before the game. So there's little things like that. It's like, this is cool. Like, everybody's excited to be a part of it.
What I like about this, Dan, is like your view of analyzing this through the lens of ownership, I think is similar to the way that I try and analyze the team, day to day, taking the information I have, the film, the stats, the whatever it might be, to suggest a most likely outcome, and I think that's just how my brain works. I don't know, that's how I think about things. And I think what you were doing was, you better knew the playbook a year ago of who and how this ownership group worked. And that led you to beliefs of what would more likely than not happen. You could have been wrong about Rudy bouncing back, and your process of the analysis would not have been. Obviously, you took the glass half full on all of it, is what people are hearing, but you're saying your reasoning for that was X, Y, and Z. And that makes sense. And I think here's the thing is, and you said this, Dan, like, they're going to make mistakes at a certain time or whatever. And that doesn't mean that the process is necessarily incorrect. What I think a Wolves fan wants is to know that there is a process that suggests the better outcome is coming 51% of the time, at least. And because that is not how it worked. The process the Minnesota Timberwolves have had as an organization has not been over 50% on pretty much on the majority of propositions thrown to them. I appreciate the perspective on that, because you had more information than I did, or that we did. It doesn't mean that every single next decision that this ownership group is going to make is like, yeah, the Gobert trade work. Also, like, we're 11 games in. Like, let's see here. There is a ton of randomness. They are humans, as you've said numerous times here too. Let's see how the human aspect of this works. What I like and am excited about is being able to cover a team that I think will have a rational process.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel a lot more confident about that through conversations we had on the pod, or otherwise with you, and that I've had with other people around the team as well. That's what I think is exciting, is that when you say the number one question is X, whatever the number one question is now, tomorrow, a year from now, you can feel confident, or your suggestion is that you can feel confident that they are going to make the right decision more often than they're going to make the wrong decision. And I think that is a big win. Dan, I really appreciate you coming on here. We kind of have been talking. We're like, all right, let's do one of these a month before the final tranche payment sort of becomes due. It's like they can pay it in December. We'll talk again a little after Christmas, updating whatever news comes out there as well. And then in March, they will be majority owners of this, and we'll start having palpable examples of what change is. And I'm excited for your perspective on that as well. Thanks for doing it, man.
No worries. And hey, if you're listening and you're a Patreon supporter,
There
right?
we go. Yes,
Come
sir.
on now, let's go. So those 2 tickets, by the way, the face value of them, those are my tickets.
I think it's big to say this. This is big to say this, by the way. Dan is, people are going to listen to some of this stuff and think Dan is a little too pro, half glass full. But that's how I've always been kind of skewed or like painted, right? Throughout all this, Dane, is like I'm always a little too optimistic, too glass half full. But it's kind of like when you're hoping for spring to come. Like spring is actually finally kind of coming for this team. And it's actually kind of okay to be glass half full, to be optimistic. But to spin it back to what Dan's talking about, like, again, when you hear the Dane Moore NBA podcast sponsored by the Genesis Company, the Genesis Company is Dan. And we appreciate you and giving back to the fans, like with these tickets. I've had someone reach out that was like, that was the coolest experience ever. And Dan's tickets are really good. So subscribe to Patreon because we're giving away good tickets. And Dan, I appreciate that from a fan's perspective because getting people to games, having them be entertained.
Well, that's what we talked about. We're like, I mean, it's like, great, support the show. We would love that. But like, I think it's a cool thing because I know where the 3 of us are all melded in. We approach our viewing of the Timberwolves, all 3 of us differently. Right. One thing that we really all are about is the culture of the fan base. And you know, and I approach this as a reporter, but I'm from here. I know I've gotten to know so many of these people and I've been at Target Center, as all 3 of us have at Target Center, so many games with empty seats. And that's a bummer. What I want is, you know, to engage this fan base, whether it's talking here, get into some games. So I think it's sweet.
It's
and
awesome.
It's been great working with Dan to have that as an option.
Totally. And my glass is half full because these guys have been running this playbook for over a decade. You know,
right,
I know it inside and out. And elite sports and elite business, you know, they're not too separate. But on the tickets, 2 tickets, $120 face value. So that's $240. Okay. So go support Dane on the Patreon. If you win the tickets, that's like worth $20 a month. So go give them $20 a month. And here's the thing: if you win the tickets, let's say somebody wins the tickets, and you invite me to my own tickets, I'll take you out to dinner, and I'll pay for all the drinks and dinner. So get out there, support Dane. You know what? And if you don't win my tickets, you can be proud. You're a part of like the best podcast in the country, right? Climbing every day. So we all want to be a part of something larger. Come join Dane and what he's building here. That's my plug for you.
No,
Best sponsor ever. I'm plugging it.
I'm gonna create a burner and apply so that I can go have dinner and use these seats. No, I this is all cool too, Dane. Right? Like to really put an end on this and the week and a 7-game winning streak, and then they kind of punted a game and everything we talked about in the first segment. It's just more exciting and with more expectation. I mean, I don't think
this pod would Spider-Man it here.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone cares about this stuff 3-4 years ago when the team is 20-62. They're good. They have a good organization. We have real people like Dan that have knowledge of what they're trying to do. They're going to slip up because nothing is perfect. But if you do anything as you kind of get ready for the holidays again, this is about as good of a moment in this franchise's history as they've had since they traded away Kevin Garnett. And I think some of these topics fall through the cracks, and it's important to bring them up, right, Dane? Like,
for sure.
Owners, none of the other stuff we talk about.
The only reason we're talking about this is because I deeply believe this is important.
Yeah, the trade deadline doesn't matter. If the owners aren't signing off on the deals and paying the fees and all that stuff, and every time Bally tweets about how we know that there's an issue with our streaming thing, it's like I can't wait for that place to go away and burn to the ground. And that's another thing that's going to come with ownership. So, Dan, I appreciate your insight more than anyone, especially as a fan. I appreciate you helping put people in the seats. And I appreciate both of you for putting up with me all the time.
All right. Well, next time we got to talk about how I don't think they overpaid for Rudy. So
okay, boom, we will.
Hot take in your face. I'm the only one that'll say it.
We will come live from a boxing ring for that one because I love Rudy Gobert. I'm a French national at this point, but I still think they paid too much for him. So we can have a business talk and a basketball talk. But yeah, Dan, I appreciate you. Dane, I appreciate you, and happy Friday.
Well, we'll have another month of the sample size, as they say, of year 2 of the Rudy Gobert era. By then, excited to talk to you about that. Then. Dan, Kyle, we'll talk on the pod here after Thanksgiving. Next up is me and Chris. On Monday, we'll talk about the Pelicans game from Saturday night before the Wolves play the Knicks on Monday evening. Until then, he's Dan Bowling. He's Kyle Teige. I'm Dane. Peace out.
Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.